At
Right.
that point, inverting like that, I'm like, bro, he's wiping everybody out. Like,
Right.
it's
And
just
Nolan even said it like, what the protagonist said, well, what happens? Well, it would be the end of all life,
yep,
So it's like, what do you mean all life? He's like, no, anyone and everything will
anything.
be dead.
Yep. You're
So,
you're talking about a massive inversion on a grand scale like that. It's like, yeah, that's it. It's a wrap.
hello, friends. I'm Anderson Marchak,
And I'm Ricardo Segura.
and we are the Panel Bros. Welcome to the panel.
Welcome to the panel.
All right. So here we are.
We are here.
We've been doing our breakdown of the filmography of the great Christopher Nolan.
In
In
Nolan, we
Nolan, we
trust.
trust.
Always.
And we last left off at Dunkirk,
Yeah.
and now we are here at Tenet.
Tenet, man. Tenet.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is when the video's done, you can play it in reverse and then
Yes.
wait until the two pieces sync up in the middle. That's how we're going to do this video.
Oh man, Nolan did quite a number on us for this movie with
Look,
time travel, with science fiction, with concepts.
Listen. Sci-fi is my favorite genre in film. And I text you, I've seen this movie 3 times, and there are still pieces where it's hard for me to grasp. But I appreciate Nolan being the filmmaker that he is and always wanting to be outside the box, something unique, something different. And throughout this movie, I'm watching, I'm like, man, this feels like he just had a really cool idea and said, hey, I got a really cool idea. All right, let's work a story around that. Because the idea of what he does in this movie is it's insane. You know what I mean? Like you said, we're talking about time travel, talking about time inversion. We're talking about things happening unilaterally at the same time from opposite sides of time. Like, forget about it.
Yeah, it was almost like once he wrapped with Dark Knight Rises, he kind of just had the freedom to do whatever he wanted after that. If like you thought what you saw in Inception was wild, it was just kind of like, oh no, we can go even further. And then he gave us Interstellar, and then he gave us a war movie with Dunkirk, but then he went right back to his science fiction roots.
I love it. I love it. And it was funny because I remember watching Inception when it first came out and people saying, oh, that was confusing. And I didn't really find Inception confusing. But Tenet, the first time I watched this movie, I was like, whoa, okay, I'm going to have to take a minute, maybe watch some, some analysis videos, some breakdowns, get a better understanding. Maybe I missed something. It's definitely a movie you have to pay attention to. This isn't a background movie. Like, I mean, after you've seen it a few times, maybe, but initially when you watch this, phone down, cut out all the distractions, and just pay attention.
So Tenet was released September the 3rd of 2020. And please keep that release date in mind, because we will come back to that
it's very important
after we're done talking about the movie itself. So there is a date that's referred to as the 14th, and the protagonist, that is his name.
No name, just the protagonist.
Yeah. Played by John David Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He's leading a CIA extraction. It's like a Black Ops type deal.
Yeah.
At a opera house. And he is saved from Cord forces by an unknown operative wearing something red.
Mm-hmm.
And the protagonist retrieves the artifact, but his team is captured and tortured. And he ends up swallowing a suicide pill, thinking it's going to kill him. Once again, another great opening scene from Christopher Nolan. We don't know what's happening here. We have this opera. Everybody's put to sleep. We have these armed men come in. We don't know what's happening here. Is this a heist? Is this a terrorist situation? What's happening here? And then, one guy is the target with the package they're trying to get, and then they get John David Washington. It's just a lot going on here, but eventually we get the opening credits after he takes the pill,
Yeah. It's if Nolan does one thing exceptionally well, it's his openers. You know what I mean? He's almost got his idea of a cold open for films, and reminds me of the Dark Knight opening and Inception and whatnot, and how those ones always stuck with me. This was the same thing, because again, we're getting introduced into this movie into a massive heist. We're still not aware of any plot what's happening, but there's a lot of exciting things happening and things that are kind of making you go, wait, what was that? You're not really sure entirely what you saw. And we go right into our protagonist, thinking he's gonna take this pill, it's gonna be lights out, and he wakes up and it's like, oh, okay. Like that whole opening sequence is very exciting. It hooks you right from the gate. Again, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what was going on per se. I just knew some sort of heist was taking place. It's shot exceptional. Nolan does what Nolan does, and it's just a great way to hook us from the very beginning.
Yeah, a little bit of shades of The Dark Knight with the heist at
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of that movie, but just on another scale. So the protagonist wakes up to find out that the pill he took that was supposed to take his life was fake, and it was only a test to see if he would reveal the information.
Yeah.
He is recruited by an organization called Tenet, and once he's recruited, they start briefing him on the things that they're doing here. And the first lesson he gets is about the bullets with the inverted energy, and they move backwards through time.
Yeah.
So this is the first time our mind gets blown a little bit in this movie with the
Oh,
bullets.
oh yeah.
And it's just a little confusing, because you see the woman, she's going like this, and it's the bullet seems to be flying up into her hand, and
Hmm.
she's trying to teach him how to do the same thing. And she's like, well, it hasn't happened yet. That's why it's
Yeah,
not happening to you.
it's bro, it's such an interesting moment because I texted you while watching this and be like, man, this thing messes with my brain because it reminded me. I kept thinking the first time I saw this, the movie Want It, where you could curve bullets and play with bullets and
There you
everything of
go.
that nature. So I was like, okay, are we doing something similar where you can manipulate time and manipulate bullets and have them invert? But that wasn't the case. Like they technically don't have any control over it. The bullet itself is already inverted, and you kind of react to it, and you have to instinctively somehow correlate that this is going to happen so that it will happen. It made my mind turn into jello. And she says, I'm paraphrasing, but I think she says something along the lines of like, don't try to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, and from that moment, I was like, okay, yeah, because my brain is melting right now. But it's a very interesting take at time. Nolan likes to play with time. A lot of people like to talk about how time isn't linear, when it comes to sci-fi and things. So the idea that objects can be inverted, and while we're moving forward, there are other things in time that are actually moving backwards, and having the ability to react with it and work with it. Like again, right now they're doing the whole like the bullet goes into her hand or the bullet goes back into the gun. Like I don't know. It's very interesting.
I like when he was telling her, why isn't it happening? She said, that's because you haven't done it yet.
Yeah,
And,
it's just,
just don't even think about it. It's just by instinct. It's
mhm.
too hard to explain. Just you'll know when
Yep.
you know. And in a way, that was Nolan telling us, don't think about it too much. Just,
Yes.
just accept this.
I appreciate when movies can do that because sometimes a movie can try to give you too much exposition and can confuse you more, or you try to find and poke holes in the logic of it all. It also reminded me of the movie Looper, where you have Bruce Willis and JGL when they were talking across each other in a diner, and he's asking them all these questions. He go, "Listen, man, we can sit here and come up with a bunch of diagrams about time travel, but at the end of the day, like it's not going to change anything. So don't rack your brain about it." Like I like when movies can do that. And Nolan is introducing such a wild concept. I'm not mad at the idea that she's just like, hey, you just have to feel it. It's like an instinct. Don't try to overthink it. So me as a viewer is okay, don't try to overthink it. Just try to, visualize what's happening and go along for the ride.
We then meet the protagonist's handler named Neil.
Mm-hmm.
It's played by Robert Pattinson. And they end up finding their way to Priya Singh, an arms dealer in Mumbai. She's a part of the operation that they
Yes.
need to get information from or get um, items from. So we get introduced to Robert Pattinson's character here. Just really likable character, very
I like
charming,
him. I like him.
very charming. Like Neil just feels like the best friend you want to have.
Yeah.
And
Very cool. Very cool guy.
uh, in a way, you meet him and you feel like you've known him for years. And
Yeah.
that kind of plays into who he ends up being by the end of the
Exactly.
movie. So
I think the way they work that character out and the way that Rob played it, yeah, I feel like you're almost supposed to feel like a familiar sense with that character. You don't really know why just yet, but it's very like just from his first interaction with the protagonist, the way that they're sitting together and communicating, it almost feels like, yeah, like this is comfortable. This isn't new or strange. It may be new to us for the first time in the movie, but it doesn't feel new. So it may have been a creative choice because it definitely does feel that way.
so Priya reveals that she is a member of Tenet and that Russian oligarch Andrei Sator has inverted her bullets and that he communicates with the future. Sator's wife, Kat Barton, is an art appraiser who authenticated a forged Goya by her friend Arepo. And Sator purchased it to blackmail her. So to get Kat's help, the protagonist and Neil, they try to steal the Goya from Sator's Freeport facility at an airport.
Yeah.
So we get a couple scenes set up here. Well, first of all, I didn't talk about it here. The scene where they're scaling the building, I thought that was pretty cool.
Very Batman. I couldn't help but think
Yes.
of like a very Batman catapult. And I'm letting you know right now, man, I kudos to the stuntman that did that because I am terribly afraid of heights. And I remember watching this and just being like, getting that queasy feeling in my stomach. Again, Nolan finds a way of doing things that feel different, feel unique, feel like you haven't seen them before. And just seeing these guys scale it the way that they did, like almost slingshotting themselves and going up the building. I was like, man, that just looks incredible.
And I mean, we don't know this for sure, but would it surprise you if that was a practical effect and that wasn't a
I
combination
I
of CGI?
I think it's a practical. Look, I'm going out on a limb here. I do not know, but based of what I know about how Nolan does things, if there is any visual effects, I think it's very minimal. But I do think that that was a practical effect. I think absolutely
Right.
they got two stuntmen that went up there and just they're harnessed in really well and just ran up a building.
There's a line that Neil says to the protagonist about the airplane.
Mhm.
And the protagonist says, "You're going to blow up an airplane. You're going to crash an airplane." He said, "No, don't be so dramatic." And well, what are you going to do? You're going to blow it up while it's still on the ground? Okay, that part's a little dramatic, just
Yeah, yeah. It's there.
a fun
There's
moment,
again. I'm a fan of Nolan's humor. I have been
Yeah.
in all his films, and I'm a fan of his humor. It's little things like that that make me chuckle.
So that was the plan, to kind of to steal the Goya from the airport.
Mhm.
Um, they are intercepted by two masked men who emerge from the other side of a machine. And in Mumbai, Priya was explaining that it's a turnstile. It's a device that inverts energy.
Mhm.
And the two men um, were traveling in opposite directions through time.
Yes.
And they say that they're the same person. That's what they told them. And she reveals that Sator sabotaged his CIA team, but Cord got the artifact, a sample of the plutonium, and it's moving it. It's moving it.
Mhm.
So we get this fight scene here, and
Bruh.
these men are moving in such a unique way. They're masked. That's for a reason.
Mhm.
But the protagonist, he's having this fight with them, and they're just we're seeing the inverted energy throughout the fight, and um, it's just wild what we're seeing in front of us.
Visually, it almost takes your breath away because you have the protagonist who, according to us, is moving forward in time, but he's having a fight with someone who's inverted. So it's very interesting to see the choreography and how the fight plays out. I would love to see how this was done because it's almost as if every time the protagonist is throwing a strike, the inverted character is also already ahead by a step, or it's just very, or actually putting themselves in danger. There's a moment where there's like a hip throw, and it's almost as if the protagonist wasn't even attempting to do that, but ends up becoming a hip throw because it already happened based off of the character that's inverted. Like visually, it's very, very unique because obviously, if you had two characters that were just being played in reverse, that's one thing. That's a very easy thing to do. Like you could just play a sequence backwards and have them both be inverted. But the reality of one character going forward in time and another character going backwards in time, interacting with one another and fighting, it's one of the highlights of the movie visually. Like I don't know how they did it, but man, it is really fun to watch.
Yeah, it looks like they're hitting the rewind button, but only half the people are rewinding
Oh,
while everyone
yeah,
else
like
is moving forward.
it's so crazy.
So the protagonist fails to steal the Goya, but Kat doesn't know this.
Mhm.
So she introduces the protagonist to Sator, her husband, who plans to kill him. And he ends up saving Sator's life after Kat tries to drown him. So they cooperate to intercept the plutonium. The protagonist and Neil, they steal the artifact, but are ambushed by an inverted Sator holding Kat hostage. And the protagonist hides the artifact. He rescues Kat, but then they're recaptured and taken to Sator's free port, where the inverted Sator interrogates them for the location of the artifact. And he eventually shoots Kat with an inverted bullet. So a lot happens here again. We have a
Yeah,
chase, a chase sequence, and
this
for
this
the protagonist doesn't know what to do because
no.
Sator's moving invertedly. You know,
It's very interesting because they're communicating with each other from two different rooms, right? And one room is inverted and one is not. So as we have our villainous character who's communicating with the protagonist, to the protagonist, like it's well, to us the viewer, it's backwards. Like we hear the dialogue backwards, and then as it's going from one room to the other, you hear the protagonist hear it correctly, and then when the protagonist is responding, it's the same thing. It sounds backwards, but then it inverts so the other character can hear it. And then you have the idea of the inverted bullet, which is, you know, wildly enough more dangerous than being traditionally shot. Like they make it a point within the film that obviously being shot is not good, but being shot with an inverted bullet is even worse because it's now going backwards through time and it's in your body. It's very strange. So when you see her get shot, it's again, it's very awkward. You see her being pressed against the glass, and then the bullet is actually coming from beyond the glass back into the gun, but through her. Like it's jarring when you see it.
so Tenet troops led by Commander Ives, they arrive, but Sator escapes through the turnstile. So to save Kat's life, they all have to invert themselves.
Yep.
And the inverted protagonist drives back to the ambush to retrieve the artifact, but encounters Sator, who ends up taking it this time. So that's where we get some more of the rules here to go into the inverted world. And you have to have like a mask because the air is different. And, you know, when you're running, you're going to feel the wind at your back instead of in front of you.
It's everything
Heat is
is
cold,
backwards. It's
cold is
cold.
hot. So
I'm telling you, it's like mirror land, right? Like everything's just
yeah.
opposite day. And the oxygen makes sense because it's like you're inverted, so now your breathing is different. So like it's like the air is almost getting sucked out of you as opposed to going in. So they have these masks to help them breathe and whatnot. So like you said, we're getting a little bit of the rules here, with dealing, especially with the hot and cold. We get to, you know, witness that up close. And because at first I was confused. Like there's a situation where fire becomes ice, and I was like, why did that happen? Oh, inverted. That's right. It's backwards. Okay, I got it. So yeah, it's fun.
And now we're seeing a little bit of a time travel aspect too, because
Yes.
the first time the chase happened, there was a random car in the middle of the two cars, and
Yes.
we never saw who was driving that car. And then this time around, we see the protagonist. He was actually
Yes.
driving the car in the middle, in
Yep.
between himself from the past and Sator on the other side.
Yep.
So
And it's that combination of the protagonist at one point in time was going forward, and at another point in time he was inverted coming backwards, and they're intersecting. They're coming across one another.
right. So to uninvert, get back to normal, the protagonist must travel back in time to the free port in Oslo and fight his past self to enter the turnstile. And that he's also followed by Neil and Kat
Mhm.
as well in this situation. So now we find out he was fighting himself earlier in the
Yes.
movie.
Yes.
What a twist.
And I'm not a smart person. I'm a silly person, but when they had the first interaction, and you probably caught it too, when Neil was able to chase down one of the men and he removes the mask, but we never see who it is, and Neil kind of stops in his place, I was like, okay, that's one of them. I don't know if it was, I didn't know if it was another Neil. I didn't know if it was another protagonist. I don't know if it was just another team member, but I knew at that moment, okay, that's someone familiar. I just don't know who it is yet. And then at that point, Neil is like, hey, don't kill him. I was like, okay, that's definitely someone they know. But I had no idea that it was going to be the protagonist himself who was going to be fighting himself. Also, like, there, okay, so there's three of him at this moment. You have the protagonist, then you have the protagonist who's inverted, and you have the other protagonist who's running through that gets caught by Neil. It is, I'm telling you, it's a mind bend.
So back in Oslo, Priya then tells Sator, the protagonist that Sator now has all 9 pieces of the algorithm. And it's a device that future antagonists need to invert the entropy of the world and destroy its past.
Yep.
She plans for Sator to get the artifact and to get the revelation about the other 8 pieces in preparation for the drop. And the protagonist realizes it is a nuclear hypocenter, and it's going to be detonated on the 14th in Sator's hometown. So we're on a Tenet ship now, traveling back to the 14th. So here we go with the time travel again.
Mm-hmm.
And Kat reveals Sator has terminal cancer. They find out that he will return to a happy moment on a family vacation in Vietnam that was also on the 14th and take his own life. And he's going to send the dead drop coordinates to the future via Dead Man Switch.
Yep.
So arriving at the 14th, Kat goes to Vietnam to pose as her past self. So this is her from the future, already knowing the things that he's going to do to her. This is before he ends up becoming this monster who we haven't talked about yet. And she needs to keep Sator alive until the forces recover the algorithm. So they use something called a temporal pincer movement.
Mm-hmm.
And with both non-inverted and inverted troops making a diversion attack so the protagonist and Ives can discreetly steal the algorithm before detonation. One of Sator's men, Volkov, traps them in the hypocenter, and Sator calls from Vietnam to explain the antagonists are trying to escape the effects of climate change. So let's take a little break here because that's a lot that's going on here.
There's a lot happening.
We've already seen what a monster Sator is. He's very abusive to his wife, and to the point of just with no motive. We don't even know why he's like this to her. You know,
I couldn't. She has a conversation with him at one point where she says that you're pretty much keeping me prisoner, pretending to still be this marriage, even though like I don't have those feelings. Like I have that love for you is gone. And I don't know if it was just one of those things where she fell out of love with him, and due to that, he was like, he had that mentality of like, if I can't have you, no one can. And he just abused her. It's not really explained if this is just has always been the relationship or not. You don't know. You just know that it is a very, very abusive, ugly relationship between these two characters, him towards Kat. And it's pretty rough to watch. So they don't really explain too much as to a why, but it's definitely something that surrounds Kat this entire movie, is this fear, this attempt to get away from him, this attempt to be with her son. And at one point, I know she mentioned that the relationship was so bad that he offered her an out and said, you can go, but you can never see your son again. And there's a really heartfelt moment and a very sad and tragic moment where she said she actually considered it. And that is horrible, because she was willing for 1 second, even just 1 second, the idea of like being free of this man, even if she never see her son, just to be free of this man's torment. It says a lot about who this dude was.
On top of being a terrible person to his wife, he's also considering using this nuclear weapons to kill
Mhm.
millions,
Everyone.
possibly billions of people. Right.
Yeah, everyone.
Right. Possibly everybody in the
Yeah.
entire world.
At
Right.
that point, inverting like that, I'm like, "Bro, he's wiping everybody out." Like,
Right.
it's
And
just
Neil even said it like, what the protagonist said, well, what happens? Well, it would be the end of all life,
Yep.
So it's like, what do you mean all life? He's like, no, anyone and everything will
Anything.
be dead.
Yep. Yep. You're
So,
you're talking about a massive inversion on a grand scale like that. It's like, yeah, that's it. It's a wrap.
so as Sator's done speaking to the troops, an inverted soldier with the red trinket sacrifices himself, letting them escape with the algorithm as the hypocenter detonates, and Kat ends up killing Sator.
Mhm.
It was really cool how she did it. She tricked him by putting some suntan lotion on his back,
Mhm.
and she says a little something how I have to be careful with this because it gets real slippery.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, um, she puts it all over his back, and we don't know why she's doing this. She ends up pulling a gun out. She says some lines to him that he hasn't even said to her yet in this timeline.
Not yet. Nope, not
Yeah,
yet.
but he
Yep.
says them back. She says them back to her, and she reveals where he would eventually shoot her. He has no idea why she has that scar.
Yeah.
So he's just really confused, and he charges her. She shoots him, and she pushes him off the edge of the boat because he's all lathered up in the suntan
Yep.
lotion, and it was easier for her to do it. So
Bro, that the way they filmed that when he's falling off the boat and it transition and obviously it's a dummy, the transition is cut so well that it made me like almost jump a little bit because it's
right.
so brutal. Like he falls off the boat and he just hits head first and neck first into the side and just flips and rotates. And I was like, good God, man, that looked brutal. But hey, man, she was smart. She knew carrying dead weight was not going to be easy. Not, so she lathered him up and it was just easy to slide him off. And that was it.
He's pretty much the villain of the movie, I would say. So,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I mean, he wants to kill everybody. So that's
Yeah,
one. And
yeah,
then on top of that, to kind of make it connect with the audience on a personal level, he's a monster towards his wife.
yeah.
And
The
I
worst.
and I think Nolan kind of had the death be brutal, to kind of show us like, no, not only did she shoot him, we saw his body just get mangled before going to the water,
Yeah.
almost like, well, he got what was coming to him type deal.
Yeah,
So
like it's one of those like you I don't want to say a cheer moment, but like yeah, you know what I mean? Because like he
right.
was a horrible, horrible, toxic, narcissistic, abusive individual. And I do love that she does get to say to him the things that he said to her. I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly the line, but at one point she stood up to him in the film and he goes, "You don't have it in you. You're not angry enough. You're
Yeah.
not angry. Like I see despair. I don't see anger." And when she pulls the gun out on this time, she goes, "What do you see? Do you see anger?" And like she shows the bruise and then she shoots him. And I was just like, oh, I was rooting for her. I was like, yeah, I was like, get him.
Yeah. So as the team break up the algorithm to hide it, the protagonist sees the red trinket on Neil's bag.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we find out the person with the red trinket's been Neil the whole time, just masked. Um, Neil reveals that he was recruited in his past by a future protagonist
Yeah.
and that they have known each other for a long time. So he must now return to the recent timeline in which an inverted Neil dies.
Mm-hmm.
And later, as Priya is about to kill Kat because of the knowledge she has, the protagonist, realizing that he ends up being the creator of Tenet, kills Priya first.
Yep.
And that's our movie. So a lot to unpack from the ending in itself here.
Dude, the
Um,
ending is great. I love the ending. It's my favorite thing about the movie is the ending.
so the red trinket we've been seeing throughout the movie, and we don't know what's this meaning here. We get to find out that that person is Neil, but from a different
Yes.
timeline. And unfortunately, we see Neil die, but
Yes.
he sacrificed himself for the greater good of what they're trying to do with Tenet. He tells the
Yes.
protagonist, listen, I know I'm going to die, but for you, this is just the beginning of our friendship. We have many years together
Yeah.
before this date actually comes. And John David Washington, he's been pretty stoic this entire movie.
Yes.
He's a pretty stoic actor in general.
Mm-hmm.
Just tears and
Yeah.
crying
He
because
brought it. He got me.
it's almost like, oh, you're my best friend. He's like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this is probably my favorite moment in the movie because we're getting like some real character build, and it's at the end of the movie. Ironically, it's like Tenet, we're in reverse, right? And when you see that character who's laying on the ground at the end of the film, and you don't know who it is, you just see the backpack, and you're kind of just like, oh, there's a point. They're showing us that. And without Neil to sacrifice himself, the protagonist would have died in that moment. And it's so wild because you don't realize that the body you see on the ground is Neil, and you don't realize that the body you're seeing is inverted because you just see a body on the ground. Protagonist looks, and there's a body on the ground, and that's all he knows. And just as the protagonist is about to be killed, you start seeing the body on the ground start to move a little bit, and you notice it's inverted, and it inverts and it stands up and it takes the bullet for the protagonist. And you're like, oh, and again, really good camera shot because you do not see the blood fills up the mask. You have no idea. And at the end, the protagonist sees and realizes it's Neil. And I don't know, there's just something really, really like therapeutic about it. It's heartfelt, and again, he's been very stoked the whole movie, and in this moment he's having a moment with Neil, and it's this idea of like he's finding out that he sent him, and this is why Neil was able to know so much about our protagonist. And he goes, hey, like, this is the end of the road for me, but for you it's just the beginning. And I don't know why, like, he's saying this, and I was like, man, he's getting me choked up. Like, it's this idea of like someone you thought you only knew a mere few days has actually been someone that you are probably best friends with, that you've known for probably half of your adult life. And it's just a really nice moment that Neil is like, Neil even says you can't change what's happened, you know, like, because the protagonist is like, oh, well, maybe he's saying it without saying it. Like, can he, if we do things differently, can we change things? You know, because he's trying to save Neil, and Neil is like, you can't change what's happened. You know, that's why things are the way that they are. You know, we appreciate the time that we have. And it's just, and he even says, now you have to let me go. And I don't know why. It's the way, it's when he says you have to let me go. It's because like it's happened already. We can't avoid it. And it had to happen in order for this to happen. It's almost very John Connor, Terminator 2, like this needs to, we need to send Kyle Reese back to
Yeah.
be my father. Like, it's very interesting like that.
And then obviously he has to kill Priya because of her plans to kill Kat.
Yep.
And then it's even, we get another shocker here. We find out that the protagonist, he's the founder of Tenet.
Yes.
Eh,
Yes. I'm
So,
telling you, again, we get a lot of reveals here. We get a lot of
right.
reveals in the final few moments.
And good job on the entire team. Everyone says, well, it's almost as if we can't tell him. He can't
Yeah.
know
You
because
can't
it
know.
would alter things. You know, we would create
Yes.
a paradox, the whole time travel situation, you know?
I love time travel. I love paradox. I love butterfly effect. I love all
Yeah.
that things. And it's throughout this movie, especially because you're dealing with multiple timelines and version of time and just going out of sync and messing anything up. And yeah, it was just like, you can't tell him. He can't know. It will affect something. And it's good they didn't tell him, because the protagonist shows that he's the type of character that if he thinks he can change something, he's going to try it. Because he made it very clear. He goes, if we change it, and he's like, no, you can't. You can't. Things are the way that they are. And it's just, I don't know, the last, I enjoy the whole movie, but the last 30 minutes is where I'm like, I'm fully in on the ride.
So we said earlier that Tenet came out in 2020.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of a situation that happened in
Oh,
2020.
there was.
And to the point where even movie theaters were shut down for a little bit.
Yes.
And slowly things started to open up again, movie theaters in particular. Warner Brothers had made an announcement that they were soon going to be releasing movies in the theater, but also on HBO Max at the same time.
The same day release theatrical streaming. Insanity.
Right. Christopher Nolan did not like this, but he still fought for Tenet to come out in the movie theater.
Yep. Theater only, baby.
And correct, he wanted it to be released in the theater first before, starting to do the HBO Max thing. And for those of you listening that aren't too sure about this, it takes a lot to release a movie in the movie theater because then you have to pay for marketing. This adds to the budget, not just the production budget, cast, crew. Now we're talking marketing. And because of the world situation going on, where people weren't really going out as much, it was a big risk. Even if
Mhm.
it was a Christopher Nolan movie, to have it
It was a
released in
very big risk.
in
It
the
was a
movie
very
theater.
There were certain theaters for a long time that just weren't open. Like, some theaters were hesitant to open. Some people were still very hesitant to go to the theater. People were unsure. So, and like you said, it was almost like a test because I don't think anybody in that position knew exactly what was going to happen. People were eager. There were fans that wanted to go. There were fans that did go, but the world was in a very different place at the time, and it definitely played a role with how Tenet did theatrically.
Right. And I want to say this, the same day releases, that didn't hit until 2021.
Mm-mm,
So Nolan knew that this was going to happen eventually.
mm-hmm.
Um, well, it was going to get a release on HBO Max eventually, you know. So he didn't want, the fans to think, well, I can skip this, and then eventually you just catch it on Max. So he was pushing for the theater release, and
Yeah,
instead of
were they?
Warner Brothers wanted it just to come out on Max, and Nolan was just, or at least delay it, you
Yeah,
know.
I remember there being a big conversation of delaying it,
Right,
and at that point, every movie under the sun was getting delayed a year,
right,
2 years, like, and I think he was just like, no, like, it's ready, let's go, we're gonna go now
right,
and see what happens.
right, and unfortunately, things didn't work out. It's the first time where we can consider this possibly a disappointment,
Hmm.
considering the situation. The budget for Tenet was listed at 205 million,
Hmm.
and worldwide it made 365 million. So
Yeah.
it was not alone. A lot of movies that came out
No.
during this time period did not do well financially.
I c
Um,
mm. It took a lot for movies to start to do well and a long time after.
Right, and that was all part of the reason that Warner Brothers announced the same day releases for 2021, because they
Mhm.
didn't know when the movie theaters would open up again to the point where people would feel comfortable going. Um, there were regulations still going on,
Yeah.
so they didn't
Like,
know.
there were certain theaters that were not would refuse to sell full capacity.
Right,
So they were like, if you bought 2 tickets, they made sure that a group of seats around you could not be bought. So the studio was worried. They were like, "Listen, we're gonna release this movie that costs quite a bit of money to make. It's Nolan. They always make a lot of money, so let's delay it. Let's hold it. Let's do this." But Nolan at the time was like, "No, it's ready to go. We can do this." And obviously, like you said, he didn't want people to feel like they could skip it and just wait for streaming.
right,
And obviously, Nolan also wasn't happy about the fact that a lot of directors were blindsided in general. A lot of them had no idea about the same day theatrical release that was coming.
right.
And that led to some strain with Warner Brothers and Nolan and directors. Like, there was a lot happening around this time. I remember just thinking, like, oh man, the movies are going to be changed forever right now, and this was one of those moments where I was like, all right, we're redefining what it means to be in the cinema.
So it made back its budget at least, but it needs to the rule is it needs to be at least twice its budget and then some
Hmm.
to take care of the marketing. So by that standard, unfortunately, double would have been 410 million, and it made 365. Now, obviously, this was due to the situation with
Yeah.
limited audience release. Well, with limited people excuse me, being able to go see this.
Hmm.
Um, in hindsight, maybe they would have benefited if they did wait, but then we would have had that situation where Nolan would have had to compete with the same day release on HBO Max.
Yep. Because if they would have delayed it, they would have delayed it to a point where they were doing same day theatrical and streaming.
Yeah,
And he knew that he had to avoid that. If they would have delayed it, they were like, hey, we're gonna delay it. And the new release date will now be whatever date they want to give it. And they were like, at this point, we're putting all theatrical release and streaming on the same day. And he was not about that. And we've been very vocal about the theatrical experience. And Nolan is one of those people as well. I remember Tom Cruise going to see this movie in theaters and promoting and saying, hey guys, be safe, go out there, enjoy the movies. Like everyone was trying to do their best to get people to go out and see it. But again, the world was just a different place at that time. I fully believe, and I can say with 100% confidence, that if the world was not in that position, this movie would have made way more money. It's a Nolan project. These movies always successfully do well financially, critically, fan buzz, say with everything. But just because of base where we were, we have to take that into consideration and into account why this movie didn't do as well as other previous films in his filmography.
So I went to the movie theater to see this.
Oh
uh,
yeah.
I had a mask on, and I
Mhm.
went to the theater, and I sat in a seat that was as far away as possible from everybody because,
That's how you got to
um,
do it.
and this might have been the last movie I saw in the theater for a while,
Oh man,
because
I couldn't remember mine.
it was Nolan, and I had to go.
Hmm.
So I went, and it was a lot to take in as far as the movie experience, but then the movie in itself.
Yes.
So, we had it's just a lot of Nolan signature things here. Once again, we had a husband and a wife
The-
strained relationship.
as
He's
soon as it happens, I'm like, there's this thing with Nolan and strained relationships and marriages.
Yeah, exactly. And then usually one person is not alive, and well, eventually that happens in the movie.
Yeah.
So
Yep. It's like there you go. It's like there you go. It's like, oh, okay, we'll go with
yeah,
it. We'll go with it.
we had the hard cuts, we had time travel, we had some science fiction, we had
Yeah.
a loud score. He just,
Oh,
you know,
there's I always put these over too. I always enjoy them. I Nolan's films always have impeccable scores. I adore those scores. Whenever he works with Hans Zimmer, like I'm just always I always download the scores from his films. Like they always get me hyped. Like they're the kind of ones that I can listen to in a gym, I'm working out, and whatnot. But yeah, there's just something about it. Like Nolan knows exactly the type of people he needs to be working on his scores. Again, Hans Zimmer is a big one. So yeah, the sound, the cuts, everything else. Again, we've talked about it. I think Nolan is a out of the box filmmaker. I think he's always trying to do things that haven't been done before, and Tenet was a clear example of that, because we've had time travel movies, right? We've had that. We'd have timeline movies, but I have never ever seen a movie that introduced the idea of inverting time simultaneously at the same time as moving forward. So like when I watched it, I didn't get to see it in the theaters. I had to wait until I could see it on streaming. And when I finally saw it on streaming, I sat there and just kind of like, all right, well, I need to watch that again. I think I saw it 2 days. I think I saw it twice in a over the weekend just to get a better grasp on things. And even to this day, I'm still like, man, Nolan, I don't know how your mind works, baby, because oh God, I never could have conceived something like this.
yeah. So I had to give a shout to the person that did the score. His name is Ludwig Göransson. So
Yeah.
he's Swedish. So no Zimmer for this one.
Hmm.
Um, but once again, just um, he brought it for a Christopher Nolan movie. You have to when you're doing a Christopher
You got
Nolan
to,
movie.
man.
And like you said, just such a unique concept. I was very confused. I was ready to watch it again,
Yeah.
but I don't recall if I saw it again in the theaters a second time. I might have just
Hmm.
waited till it came out on Max because um Warner Brothers was at least doing like a delay. They weren't
Yes.
doing same day release, but I think the number was like 45 days, something like that.
45 days. I think the
You know,
45-day window.
so we got to see it again once that happened, but nonetheless, just you know that's why I go to see this man's movies when it comes out in the movie
Dude,
theater.
Nolan is a visionary. He is an artist. He's a filmmaker to the 10th degree. I was talking to a buddy today and talking about how, Nolan is still the guy. Like I love directors like Denis Villeneuve and others. But there's something about Nolan that, again, when I remember seeing the teaser for Tenet, I didn't know what I just watched. I was like, I have no idea what that is, but he's got my money. Let's make it happen. Again, it's terribly sad it happened when it happened, but hey, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. In another timeline, maybe this
Yeah,
movie
right,
ends up becoming a blockbuster,
right.
and we'll never know,
And you
unfortunately.
know what? Look, it hasn't hurt him. The entire world knows what the situation was. Studios know. Warner Brothers learned the hard way
Right.
just how how great of a filmmaker Nolan is because of the whole situation. Nolan stepped away from Warner Brothers. And like I'm sure every day they're kind of like, oh, how do we get him back? It's
Right.
Christopher Nolan. But you know, it is what it is. Like you said, in another time, in another timeline somewhere, it came out and it was a massive blockbuster success.
Let's give a little love to the cast here.
Yes.
Um, the standout faces at least. So we have John David Washington as the
Mm-hmm.
protagonist. We have Robert Pattinson as Neil, his handler. We have Elizabeth Debicki as Kat,
Love
and
her.
we had a Michael Caine appearance, of course. He
Of
played
course we
Sir
did.
Sir Michael Crosby, an
Mm-hmm.
intelligence officer. We had Dimple Kapadia as Priya. That's the
Mm-hmm.
arms trafficker. We have Kenneth Branagh as Sator, who we're going to come back to this. Yeah, he did too much of a good job. I hated him in this movie.
I even his choice of it's almost he always talked like this.
Yeah,
It was very low. He makes you listen to him. Like that's how he spoke. Like it to the point where it's like, oh my god, like you're this sniveling evil person that you don't even put effort into your words. You know what I mean? You just I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to take you to the back and I'm going to kill you. You know what I mean? It's like, good Lord. But he's a terrible villain. And like you said, I despised him. He did a great job. Listen, great actor. He did a phenomenal job making me hate him because they crossed some they pushed the limits in this one. And there was times I'm like, ooh, I can't wait for him to bite the dust.
I also recognize Himesh Patel as Mahir. He's one of Neil's men. And
Mhm.
then a small appearance by Aaron Taylor Johnson as
Bro,
Ives.
I again if I hope this is Nolan's new Easter egg where he just randomly has a big name actor that you have no ideas in the movie just shows up. So I remember saying, I was like, is that Aaron? Is that like just me completely talking about is that Aaron? That's Aaron.
Yeah,
Wow. I had no idea he was in this movie. He's awesome. I like this. Keep going.
right. And that's just a you can say that that's just a commentary though for anyone that's been in any of Nolan's movies. He's
Mm-hmm.
just a name. And if you could have a part, no matter how big or small, you take it to be in
Yeah.
a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Because he's only in the final act of the movie. Like that's it. Like he comes
yeah.
in the second half and periodically he does his thing and he's out. And I'm like, yo, that would I would do the same thing. I don't care. Like Nolan's like, you're gonna play the gas pump attendant. I'll be right there. I got you, man. I'll be right there.
So for me, I think it just goes without saying, Robert Pattinson's the standout in this movie. He's just such a likable character. Neil is just awesome. He's such a
He's great.
in a such a I can say that in such a confusing movie with confusing parts and concepts and a lack of character development. Which,
Mhm.
by the way, that's something else we can touch on. We find this person in Neil, and it's almost like he's there to connect us to the movie and make us
Yeah,
feel, you know.
he's almost like our guide. Like he's holding us by the hand and he's walking us through the movie. He's like, all right, I'll help you guys out. Yeah, he's great. He's great. There was a couple moments when Tenet came out. This is already, I believe, when Robert Pattinson had been announced as the Batman. There were a couple moments in Tenet where I was like, I see a really good Bruce Wayne. Like he had the suit, he had the hair, he had the style. I was like, oh look, I could see it. I hope we see that Bruce Wayne. We haven't seen it yet, but I digress. But yeah, he's great in the film, and Robert Pattinson just continues to show the world that like he's a great actor. I know for a long time it was very hard for people to see him outside of Twilight. They're like, oh, it's the guy from Twilight. But Robert Pattinson reminds us in every performance that he takes, every performance that he makes, I should say, in every role that he takes, that he is a fantastic actor, and he's a huge standout because as we mentioned, John David Washington, he's very stoic in the movie. He's not bad in the movie. He's just stoic. But Neil has there's this liveliness to him. He's very charismatic. And like you said, he kind of makes you feel like you've known him a little bit. So yeah, he's great. I loved him. I also really liked Elizabeth Debicki as well as Kat.
Oh
I
yeah,
like her. I like her a lot. She is what 6'2" or something.
yeah.
Like I love her, man. Like I'm like, yo, she is an Amazon. She is fantastic. She is a great actor. So like she's got these very emotional, powerful scenes in the movie. which is interesting because she's such a tall person, right? So she's so tall, and she towers almost everyone in this movie, but she knows how to make her character feel small and submissive, which is not an easy thing to do, especially when you're that big in nature, when you're that tall in nature. Again, she's towering over everybody, but she ultimately in this movie is a victim of domestic abuse and violence, and she still finds a way to make herself as a character look submissive, look injured, look wounded. And again, that's not easy to do. So she was also a standout for me. I liked her a lot.
So we had a lack of character development in
Mm-hmm.
Dunkirk due to that
Yes.
situation, which we covered, mostly because it was a war movie. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
had to be uniform. Just hard to find some character development. It was kind of a middle of the ground character development film for me as far as Tenet goes. I feel as stoic as John David Washington was, his character did have some type of character growth throughout the movie because
Mm-hmm.
he starts out as this person just completely in the dark, but eventually he's just and not trusting. He eventually
Mm-hmm.
just starts trusting people left and right because he has no choice. He's getting introduced to this wild concept of inversion and the inverted world and all these different things. So I felt his character had a little bit of growth. Elizabeth Debicki's character, she probably had the most growth in the entire
Yeah.
movie because she starts out as this vulnerable woman going through this awful situation, being with this awful man, and then she ends up having the strength to stand up to him by the end of the movie. Um, I don't think the Neil character had any character development per se. He was just so likable that we just enjoyed
Yeah.
him the entire time. You know, he was probably the most interesting character, despite the lack
Yes.
of character development. If anything, character growth rather. And if anything, just we got to see him the most and see just his relationship with the protagonist grow throughout the movie, and then we find out why by
Yeah.
the very
Again, it's very ironic that I felt it's at the very end we get the most character development. It's so
right.
funny. It feels, again, it feels like as we're watching it, the story we're watching itself is inverted because it's not until the end where we get that real character moment between Neil and between our protagonists. And for the first time in the film, the protagonist is showing real emotion. Real emotion is being evoked, and you see the tears in his eyes and whatnot. I was like, oh man, I felt it. And like you said, with Kat's character, her going from being a victim to finding her voice, there's a moment in the movie where she talks about seeing a woman dive off a ship and feeling like envious of seeing someone be so free. And then you find out that she's actually seeing herself. She's seeing the strength in herself because she's been inverted. So I do like that we get to see the parallel of who she was in the beginning and who she is by the end. So yeah, there's some good stuff with this cast.
So my biggest qualm in the movie is the lack of character growth or
Mhm.
development for Sator. Um, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when a bad guy's just a bad guy for the sake of being a bad guy or
Yeah,
a
just a bad
villain
guy.
or a
Hmm.
villain. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps the cancer pushed him to become this person. You know, we don't know. There isn't really too much information there. Was it the money? Was it the power? You know, and then we just escalate things to the point of he goes from being um, an abuser to being somebody that wants to destroy the entire world, you know?
The
Like,
entire world merely because he won't be in it. You know what I mean?
right,
Like we're talking very almost like a boogeyman level of writing in terms of like, well, he's just the bad guy. Like that's it. And it's like
right.
what? Like it's such a big leap that you're what you're explaining to me is he's such a narcissist that the idea that he will no longer be in this world, he feels then okay, then the world shouldn't exist. I'm like, that is a leap. Like how,
Yeah.
I don't even know how we got there, my
He
boy,
dropped the
but
line to Cat, like, if I can't have you, no one can have
no
you.
one can.
And he meant that literally. No, nobody
Yep,
ever.
nobody ever, ever. And I'm
So,
like,
like, and you're thinking,
bro,
you're right. You're thinking, oh, he's going to kill her. No, he's going to kill everybody.
everybody. I was like,
So,
listen to me. She is beautiful. She is intelligent. I get it. But the world, my boy, like you
yeah,
like it's just again, yeah, we don't really get to know who he is and what he's about. We just know his what his end game is. That's pretty
right.
much it. Like we know his end game, and he's a very one dimensional, just very abusive character in every sense of the word. That again, He's very, very, very dislikable, very hard to look at times. Where I was just like, again, there was a moment where I was texting, I was like, man, there's some rough scenes in this movie with this character, and again, the actor does a great job with it, but it just kind of stays there, like he's there the whole movie.
So we're gonna go forego the notable lines that we usually do. There weren't too many monologues or interactions that we haven't already
Mhm.
touched upon. So we're gonna start wrapping things up here. As far as closing thoughts go, uh, how do you feel about Tenet now that it's, you've had a chance to rewatch it and since it came out and such? And this is the last Nolan release up until what's going to come out pretty soon. So
Yeah, it's I've now seen it I think 4 times, and um I have never seen a bad Nolan film. We always talk about this is very interesting when someone says this is my least favorite Nolan film. This is my least favorite Nolan film. In no way, shape, or form is that a real negative, because again, they're all great. I do not dislike this movie at all. I do think I enjoy the idea of the movie more than some of the execution. Because again, visually it's phenomenal to look at. I love the idea of the inversion and time travel. But like you said, it would have been fun to have some more character development with our protagonists and whatnot, and certain things of that nature. Again, I felt like it was a middle ground. I thought you said it perfectly when you said that it felt like after Dunkirk, like this was in the middle, like it was almost there. Like we almost got a lot of good character development, but I could have liked a little bit more. But again, Nolan just continues to prove that he's an out of the box thinker. And I'm always going to appreciate the idea that he's willing to make these movies. And I'm very, very happy that because of the success of his filmography, that he has the ability to do these. If any other director who probably didn't have the notoriety of Nolan had pitched this, there'd probably be a bunch of guys and women in suits going, I don't understand it, so why would we make it? If we don't understand it, the general public won't understand it. But because it's Nolan, he gets the ability to make these movies, and I'm always going to appreciate that, because I want directors to push the limits. I want them to make me question what I saw. It's okay if I don't understand. I'll try to break it down and watch it again. That's perfectly fine. So after watching this movie, I took a lot of that away with me, and I did enjoy it. I will say it's probably not one of my top Nolan films. You know, we talk about The Dark Knight, we talk about Interstellar, we talking about The Prestige. Like, he's got a filmography. We've broke it down week after week, and this is probably not my favorite. I like it more than Dunkirk. But then it probably falls behind Dark Knight, Interstellar, and whatnot. But in no way, shape, or form is it a bad movie. I thought casting Robert Pattinson was great. John, oh god, what's his middle name? I'm drawing a
David,
blank. John David Washington. Casting. Hey, we got a POC in the lead of a Christopher Nolan movie. You
right?
know what I mean? Like something like it's to some people who would consider very small, is pretty significant, and it was great to see that. And then casting Kat, who's over like 6'2". God, I don't even know where her height is, but it's just like I like that Nolan is like, no, I want to cast these people. I'm going to put them in this movie. You know, there's would be a lot of times where they'd be like, oh, that height difference, we got to do something about that. He's like, no, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I don't care that she towers over my lead. We're going to put that in the movie. You know what I mean? Like, I love little things like that. But I enjoy Tenet. It will always be one of my favorite sci-fi films in general over a grand scope of things. Again, in the filmography of Nolan, it's probably not near the top, and that's okay. I've had a bunch of fun theories about the movie, about like, is Neil maybe the young boy that's Kat's son? Like, I love that stuff. I love theorizing and coming up with ideas throughout the film and everything else. But Nolan's going to do what Nolan does, and I love that about him. Great opening, phenomenal ending. I absolutely love that ending. Tenet's a good time.
Let's as we wrap things up here, I did want to give a shout to the Oscars. I usually do because his
Mm-hmm.
movies do get nominated for Oscars most of the time. He ended up winning the Oscar for best visual effects for Tenet, and there was a nomination on best production design. So those were the only
Nice.
two. They didn't go to him personally, but his movie did.
Mm-hmm.
Get some Oscar nominations here. I'm going to come back to that in a second here. I thought this was just another great Nolan movie as far as originals go. I
Yeah,
think, you and I are both of the thinking that regardless of how we felt about a movie, at least we got to sit down and watch an original. In a world
absolutely.
of franchises and superhero movies and universes and all these separate things going on, Nolan is still making original movies. And that's something I have to be thankful for. And as of this recording, it's July 2023. Oppenheimer's coming up pretty soon. And
Yeah.
the world is anticipating Nolan's next movie, because now it's a situation where the theaters aren't shut down anymore. People aren't scared to
Mm-mm.
go to the theater anymore because of the world situation that happened. So people are anticipating a pretty grand event, so to speak, based
Oh
upon
yeah.
the trailers and the marketing and such. So we're excited to see what Nolan does next. And um, we plan on doing a breakdown for Oppenheimer
Oh
when
yes, we do.
it comes out. So please,
We got our tickets. We got
yeah,
our tickets. We're ready to go.
yeah, please come back and listen to us as far as that goes, because oh yeah, we're definitely gonna be excited to talk about that. But as far as Tenet goes, like you, not one of my favorites from Nolan, but at the same token, it's, what do we say? Th- They're all
Yep.
amazing.
It doesn't matter, man. They're
Yeah, they're all
all
great. Just
great.
because it's not one of my favorite Nolan movies, well, guess what? It's not one of my favorite Nolan movies, but it's still better than all these other movies here
It's
in our
that's
eyes.
all it is. Yep.
So, but I just the only thing I wish could have happened is if more people could have ended up seeing this in the movie theater, because that's
Yeah.
another thing. Christopher Nolan makes movies meant to be seen in the movie theater.
Mhm.
Not just originals, but movies that are meant to be seen in the movie theater. That's what he wants. So that's as far as that goes. Alrighty, folks, that was the Panel Bros official breakdown for Tenet by Christopher Nolan. Please give us a like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. We would appreciate it, especially those subscribes. That helps us with our reach. Also, if you could, in the comments below, let us know how you felt about Tenet, and if you enjoyed it, if you got a chance to see it in the movie theater, if you had to wait to see it streaming at home, please let us know. As we have stated, we've had a wonderful time doing our breakdown for the filmography of Christopher Nolan. We are not done yet. We still have one more movie left,
Oh
and
yeah.
that is Oppenheimer, which is going to be released in the movie theater. And this is going to be our first time doing a breakdown for a movie that is still in the movie theater. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a real special time for us, and we can't wait to bring it to you. And we might have even more planned for Christopher Nolan after that. So you have to stay tuned as far as that goes, folks. For Ricardo Segura, this is Anderson Marchak saying thank you for coming to the panel.